It's true that a term that is seen as offensive in one culture may be quite normal in another. Depending on how you say it, even a phrase like loser dad might seem sort of cute. I lost my wife in a vehicle accident when my daughter was still very young, and I was devastated. I got myself out of that rut, quit freelancing to steady my income, launched my own business, and have continued ever since for the sake of my daughter. My daughter started working as a teacher and starting her own life a few years ago. She is now getting married at last. Although his father is a senior executive at a large bank and an elitist who despises people like me who run startups, the man she is marrying is extremely courteous and respectful. In order to avoid causing any issues for my daughter's marriage, I made every effort to keep a positive connection with this father-in-law. However, despite my best efforts to accommodate him, he was never content. He made a stupid joke at the wedding reception by putting loser dad on my name tag. For the sake of my daughter and her husband, I stopped holding back after that embarrassing reception and faced him head on. Given his exaggerated sense of elitism and disdain for new business owners like me, it was time for him to own up to the repeated insults he directed at me. I am Stephen Mitchell, and I am the founder of an IT startup. At the age of 30, I started business at a period when internet access was expanding across the nation. During that time, there was a huge need for system engineers, and my company was able to successfully ride that wave. In the 20 years since then, there have been significant changes in the IT sector. Nearly 80% of the nation's population now owns a cell phone, and even elderly individuals use social media and texting apps on a daily basis. A never-ending cycle of change resulted from the way lives change, which in turn led to new developments in IT. It was never easy to keep up with these quick changes, but I decided against expanding my business mindlessly. In order to adjust to the changing business, I instead used a selective small team method with only the most skilled people. Many others were establishing their own businesses at the same time I did, but the majority of them have since filed for bankruptcy or withdrawn from operations. However, my business has persevered through those difficult times and is still in operation now. It may come across as a little arrogant, but I think I had a talent for predicting the industry's trajectory and developing plans appropriately. I was a complete introvert while I was a student, spending all of my time in my room playing games or working on programming. Neither I nor anybody else would have predicted that I would one day own my own business. I've always enjoyed serious thought, and I could lose myself for hours playing challenging puzzle games. Even though I didn't work very hard, I always got decent grades in science classes, which I enjoyed. On the other side, I detested loud social situations and was never very adept at sports. I never really stood out in the school's social structure and kept a low profile in class. Even though I was definitely close to the bottom, I never became angry about it or wanted to get higher. I just didn't enjoy going to school. I truly just wanted a place where I could think peacefully and unhindered. When I started university, I at last discovered that atmosphere. In contrast to high school, I could complete my degree at my scientific and engineering university as long as I got my credits and finished my graduation research. Regardless of attendance, some teachers even awarded credits if you performed well on tests. So I only went to class as much as necessary and spent the rest of my time learning programming on the university's high-performance computers. I didn't have a clear goal for what I wanted to do with this skill. I just found it thrilling to make a program behave exactly as I envisioned it in my head. I preferred working with computers over interacting with people. So naturally, I had very few friends, but I never felt lonely. Until high school, being around people who looked down on me was stressful. Getting away from that environment brought me a sense of relief because I could finally immerse myself in what I love without worrying about others. I had built enough skill by the time I graduated to be a valuable asset at any company. One of my professors was so impressed with my programming skills that several major companies offered to hire me if I would just go through the formality of an interview. But I had no desire to give up the quiet independence I enjoyed in university and return to the noisy, hierarchical environment I remembered from high school. At that time, remote work from home had not yet become widespread. Taking a job at a big company meant commuting every day. I couldn't see myself enduring life packed in the crowded trains every morning and evening, working in a tall building full of complex human relationships. So in the end, I chose not to join any company and started working as a freelance programmer. In the beginning, my income was unstable, But in this field, performance speaks for itself. As long as I could demonstrate my ability, I had no trouble getting good-paying jobs. For the first few years after graduation, I worked alone. But one day I was asked to meet face-to-face with a representative from a company that regularly outsourced programming work to me. It was during that meeting that the person who appeared before me as the client representative would later become my wife. Though I had always struggled with social interaction, especially with women, our conversations were strictly about work and programming, which made it easy for me to talk to her. As we continued to meet for project discussions, I gradually stopped feeling the usual pressure to say the right thing around her, and I found myself able to speak naturally. She too preferred thoughtful conversation over smooth-talking men. So we connected well to our work, and before long we began spending time together even outside of our jobs. Since my student days, I resigned myself to the idea that I would probably go through life without ever forming a romantic relationship, and I had told my few close friends the same. That's why those friends were shocked when we got married just a year after meeting. But honestly, no one was more surprised than I was. Even after getting married, I didn't change my lifestyle as a freelance programmer. My wife left her job after we got married, but she used her experience in the IT industry to become my manager, helping me with my work. Thanks to her, I was freed from the burdens of sales, tax paperwork, and other time-consuming tasks, which allowed me to fully immerse myself in programming, and I began earning several times more than a typical corporate systems engineer. Not long after we had fully settled into our new life, we were blessed with a daughter. We named her Samantha. She grew up healthy without any major illnesses and eventually started elementary school. At that time, I truly believed that life was something that rewarded hard work. I had a sense of fulfillment I could never have imagined as a student, and I was more determined than ever to work hard and support my family. It wasn't long after that when I was struck by the most devastating moment of my life. One day, my wife was hit and killed by a car with faulty brakes while walking down the street. She was not only my wife and the one who managed everything about my work environment, but most importantly, she was Samantha's mother, and in an instant, she was gone. No amount of words could ever describe the shock and despair I felt at that time. The trauma was so intense that my memory became fragmented, and even now, I still cannot piece together the funeral events in proper order. I can recall certain images and phrases from that time, but I'm unable to follow the sequence or understand the connections. That's how completely shattered I was, unable to think clearly at all. The world before me felt meaningless, and I was close to forgetting why I was even alive. If it hadn't been for Samantha, I don't think I would have made it to age 50. Samantha, still in elementary school, was so shocked by losing her kind and loving mother that she stopped eating and had to be put on an IV drip at the hospital. When I saw Samantha lying weak and pale in that hospital bed, something stirred back to life inside me. My wife wasn't coming back. I had to finally accept that. As her father, how could I remain broken and hollow? If I were the only one suffering, I could wallow in it all I wanted. But now I was the only one who could support Samantha. That sudden wave of realization surged through me, and I began to pick myself up and move forward despite the grief. Sometimes I wonder if my wife, watching from heaven, gave me a final push, telling me to get it together and stand strong. In any case, from that moment on, I made it my life's goal to ensure that Samantha would have a bright and fulfilling life, and I resolved to do everything necessary to make that happen. The first step was returning to work. Until then, I had always waited for my wife to bring in the projects, but from now on, I would have to handle everything myself. Fortunately, the clients I had built trust with welcomed me back and began giving me assignments just like before. But no matter how motivated I was, there were only so many hours in a day. Handling all the non-programming tasks while also taking care of Samantha on my own quickly became overwhelming. Even losing a bit of sleep wasn't enough to keep up. If it were just a matter of getting by, we could have continued like that. But with Samantha growing up and future education expenses in mind, I knew I had to rethink my approach to work. I considered hiring a manager, but I knew no one could understand me and work with the same attention to detail my wife had, so I couldn't bring myself to go through with it. After struggling with these thoughts for some time, I finally decided at the age of 30 to start a company. I had no intention of creating a large corporation with many employees. I believed that if I could handpick a small team of people, I could communicate with effortlessly and form a highly profitable group of professionals. Even someone like me could make it work. So I began managing the company by trial and error, making many mistakes along the way, but steadily building a structure that suited me. I recruited a friend who had great people skills and excelled at sales. And I also hired and trained younger talent who could support my programming. Gradually, I expanded the company. 3 years after launching the business, we had grown to a team of 7, including myself, and had become recognized in the industry as a team of highly skilled professionals. By that time, Samantha had also recovered from her mother's death and was back to being her cheerful self, attending school with energy. By the time she entered junior high school, my company was able to collaborate with large corporations. Now, 20 years since I founded the company, it has grown into a comprehensive IT services firm that provides not only software development, but also hardware for network infrastructure as a package solution. We have 60 employees, not many for a company of our standing, but we remain firmly committed to a small elite team, and our members are incredibly talented and diverse. A few years ago, we started working with major companies on financial systems, and some of the advisors we brought in from securities firms and investment funds are now managing our corporate assets. Thinking back to how I once refused to join any company because I didn't want to deal with too many people, it's almost hard to believe the position I'm in now. Life truly is unpredictable. And all this began because after my wife passed away, I wanted to ensure I had the financial means to raise Samantha without compromise. As for Samantha, she found her calling during her student years and entered the Faculty of Education to become a teacher. She now works as an elementary school teacher, dedicating herself to her students. To the public, I am seen as a successful entrepreneur who built a highly profitable startup. But more than anything I achieved as a business owner, what I am most proud of is that I was able to fully support my daughter Samantha as her father until she realized her dream of becoming a teacher. Lately, my greatest concern had been Samantha's marriage. Shortly before graduating from university, Samantha had set her heart on a young man she wanted to marry in the future. His name was Tyler, a cheerful young man 4 years older than Samantha. Upon graduating, Samantha brought Tyler home and formally introduced him to me. Tyler had been raised in a well-off household, as his father was an executive at a major bank, and he carried a refined air about him that was immediately noticeable. Despite being raised under the guidance of such an elite father, Tyler showed no arrogance at all and treated me, Samantha's father, with the utmost respect. Just one look at the way they cared for each other, and I felt certain that Samantha would be happy with this young man. Since losing my wife, I had thrown myself into building a company to raise Samantha without compromise. Now that she had found a stable job doing what she loved and a dependable partner to share her life with, I felt that my own life had finally come full circle. That was the feeling I had. So, from the time I met Tyler, I simply wished for the day to come when Samantha could be married in peace, free from any trouble. Some might think it's an overreaction for a father to be so cautious before his daughter's wedding. But the truth is, I had one lingering concern. That concern was Tyler's father, Thomas. As a matter of fact, I had previously done business with the bank where Thomas served as an executive, and I was already somewhat familiar with who he was, even before Samantha introduced Tyler. My company had been planning to expand operations, and we had been negotiating financing with several major banks, including Thomas's. This expansion plan had been carefully developed over several years, and we were fully prepared. So rather than negotiate from scratch, I approached the banks with a firm proposal. Here is our business plan, and if you agree with it, this is the amount we'd like to borrow. I thought this approach would save time for both parties rather than wasting it haggling back and forth. However, Thomas apparently saw my direct approach as presumptuous. I don't care how well they're performing. Some upstart startup thinks it can throw terms at us and dictate the loan. That's the height of arrogance. That's what I heard Thomas had said in anger. Unless they show a willingness to significantly back down from these terms, don't bother dealing with them. It seemed my decision to present firm terms up front had offended Thomas's deep sense of elitism and his respect for hierarchy and formality. If I've angered a key decision-maker, we might not be able to secure funding from that bank anymore, I thought, and I decided not to push further. I prioritized not worsening the relationship. So, while I was still cautiously continuing negotiations, Samantha suddenly introduced Tyler, who is Thomas's son, as her fiancé. I was stunned by the coincidence. However, it had never even occurred to me to link business negotiations with Samantha's choice of a lifelong partner. Even if Thomas had taken a hard stance in our dealings, I never let that influence how I treated Tyler. As Samantha's father, I made a sincere effort to get to know Tyler and saw that he was earnest, principled, and genuinely cared for her. So it never once crossed my mind to oppose their marriage, and I intended to treat Thomas with the utmost respect as Samantha's future father-in-law. Naturally, Thomas must have realized I was the entrepreneur who had requested financing from his bank. But I believe that even if he felt resentment toward me as a businessman, he would act calmly and respectfully for his son's sake. Unfortunately, that hope was betrayed. During several wedding preparations, when we crossed paths, Thomas repeatedly took a condescending attitude toward me. "So, you're Samantha's father? The man who tried to squeeze absurdly generous loan conditions out of our bank is now to become Tyler's father-in-law. I find that rather hard to digest." That's how Thomas opened the conversation at the very first formal family meeting, freezing the room with tension. Tyler, having apparently heard about me from his father beforehand, immediately cut in. "Dad, you promised you wouldn't bring that up today." Thanks to him, things didn't escalate further. But every time Thomas gave me that cold, scrutinizing look, I couldn't help but feel shaken. Later at the engagement meeting, Thomas found a moment to speak with me alone. "I had always hoped Tyler would marry someone from a more respectable background," he began abruptly. "I see." When he first told me he wanted to marry Samantha, I tried to get him to reconsider, but he's as stubborn as I am. No matter what I said, he refused to treat his choice of a spouse like some part to be swapped out. So I gave in and let him go through with it. After meeting Samantha, I found her to be a fine young woman. I won't oppose the marriage any further. "I truly appreciate your understanding. But just because I've accepted her doesn't mean I've accepted her father." "I understand." "So you've started an IT company and somehow managed to keep it afloat. But your background is rather irregular, isn't it? When I first saw your alma mater, I didn't even recognize the name. Turns out it's ranked far below the top-tier universities I graduated from. Barely a mid-tier university." It's true that the university isn't widely known and offers fewer departments than elite institutions in the city, but it has excellent faculty in the sciences and has produced many skilled engineers. One of its researchers even gained international recognition recently. "Oh, so are you trying to tell me you're one of those brilliant graduates I should be impressed by?" "No, that's not what I meant at all. I was only trying to explain how the university is viewed in the academic community." "I see. So what you're implying is that I, a bank executive, wasn't even capable of researching that information on my own. I thought I had the ability to hold a position like mine, but I suppose to a hotshot startup founder like you, I must seem like nothing more than an incompetent old man. How humbling." "Please wait. I don't see you that way at all. We are about to become family through our children, and I sincerely hope to maintain a peaceful and respectful relationship. If there's anything I've done that caused offense, I will correct it. But please, for the sake of our children, let's not escalate things unnecessarily." "Humph. If you were capable of such humble behavior, you should have shown it from the beginning. Had you approached our bank for financing with that level of courtesy, I would have been much more willing to face you pleasantly. But I'm already convinced you harbor a deep-rooted arrogance that can't be hidden. Just because you're bowing your head in panic now that I'm confronting you doesn't mean I'll be easily fooled. The only reason I'm accepting Samantha as part of our family is because Tyler insists on marrying her. But her relatives, that's another story. Especially someone like you with such a questionable background and a suspicious route to entrepreneurship. I cannot allow a man like that to act as one of my family." From those words, I realized Thomas had thoroughly investigated my background. He seemed to view my path, working as a freelancer after university and suddenly founding a company at 30, as suspicious and irregular. These days, it's not unusual for students to launch startups even while still in school. But to someone like Thomas, a man of my generation, not entering a company and becoming a president at such a young age seemed unnatural, untrustworthy even. Had this been a business setting, I could have insisted that my achievements should speak for themselves, not my past. But this wasn't business. Thomas was examining me as the father of his son's bride, and I couldn't afford to push back the way I would in negotiations. It's true that I didn't join a company after university and instead worked independently, eventually starting my own business. I understand that this may not align with your values, but I've never been involved in anything illegal or shady. Still, I realize I cannot fully erase your doubts today. So after Tyler and Samantha are married, I will avoid participating in family gatherings and keep our connection as in-laws as discreet as possible. I hope you can accept that as a compromise. I assume Thomas feared someone of questionable background like me might linger too close and try to exploit his status as a bank executive. So I hoped that if I vowed not to act as a relative, it might ease his suspicions somewhat. Well, it's not like you said anything I hadn't already assumed, but if you're making that promise yourself, then it carries some weight. So you won't be attending the wedding reception, correct?
What?
You just said you would avoid participating in family gatherings. The wedding reception is the most public one of them all. It's only logical to cancel your attendance there first. Surely you wouldn't go back on your freshly spoken vow. I only said I wouldn't behave like a relative after they're married. Not attending my daughter's wedding reception is unthinkable. So that's your true nature. You offer a gesture of compromise, but when pressed, you immediately backtrack to protect your own interests. Just what I'd expect from someone who graduated from a mid-tier university and skipped entering the workforce before starting a company. That aggressive loan negotiation of yours was just another bluff, wasn't it? At that moment, I finally understood that Thomas held a deep-seated animosity toward me, and that no matter how much I yielded, he would never accept me as part of his family. If you insist on attending the reception, go ahead, but stay out of the spotlight. If you make a scene, I'll remove you by force if necessary. If you want to watch your daughter's big day to the end, stay in the shadows and behave yourself. With that, Thomas turned and walked away. I stood there in shock, unable to process the depth of hostility I had just encountered. There's no salvaging my personal relationship with Thomas, but at least he seems to like Samantha. If staying quiet at the reception is all it takes to ensure her wedding goes smoothly, then I'll accept that. Focusing only on Samantha, I resolved to avoid drawing any attention and do nothing to provoke Thomas's anger during the reception. At that point, I had accepted every demand he had thrown at me, and I clung to the faint hope that he wouldn't push it any further. That's why I had no idea Thomas was already planning a public humiliation for me at the wedding. The day of the reception arrived. I visited Samantha in her dressing room and saw her in her wedding gown. She reminded me so much of her mother in her youth that I had to fight back tears. Watching her surrounded by friends, smiling and receiving their blessings, I was filled with satisfaction. I stepped outside the venue, looked up at the sky, and told my wife in heaven, I fulfilled my role. As the opening time approached, I greeted guests at the entrance and entered last after confirming that everyone had gone in. Though Thomas had warned me to stay discreet, I had already planned to be as invisible as possible. Even without that, the stars of the day were, of course, the bride and groom. I would be content just watching them from afar. But as I approached the family seating area, I couldn't believe my eyes. Each seat had a name tag printed in advance to avoid confusion. Mine should have read Stephen Mitchell. However, what I saw there was not my name, but the words loser dad. If it had simply been a typo or the wrong name altogether, I wouldn't have cared. However, it was clear that this childish insult, loser dad, couldn't have appeared by accident, and it had undoubtedly been planted deliberately by someone with malicious intent. Those around me waiting for me to sit down saw the shift in my expression and quickly noticed a name tag, causing a stir. One of the staff, alerted by the commotion, came over and noticed the tag. I heard a muffled gasp. How could this happen? Upon closer inspection, it was clear this wasn't some handwritten prank. It was printed exactly like the others. The staff member who gasped had probably realized right away that this was part of the official print badge, not a last-minute joke. So, Someone tampered with the data before printing, and only a few people could have done that. As I muttered this to myself, I heard a voice. Well, what a surprise. You know, back in the day, it wasn't uncommon for digital text to get scrambled. I guess things like that still happen, huh? The voice belonged to Thomas. The moment I saw the name tag, I had already suspected him. The venue staff could have altered the data, for sure, but who else would have a motive to humiliate me like this? And now, standing in front of me with a smug grin, Thomas was toying with the tag like it was nothing. As the groom's father, he could have easily told the staff that there was a mistake in the guest list and provided a correction to replace my name. Everyone else was pale with shock, but Thomas alone wore a pleased expression, confirming my suspicions beyond any doubt. Dad. Suddenly, I heard my daughter's voice. Samantha and Tyler had left the stage, drawn by the commotion. They both stared, speechless, at the tag in Thomas's hand. Who would do something like this? This is awful. Who had access to the name list? Find out and hold them responsible. Even though we were in the middle of the wedding reception, Samantha's eyes were welling with tears, and Tyler was visibly agitated. I quickly approached them and said, "This is nothing. If you two cause a scene now, it could ruin the entire day. But this is just unacceptable." That's right. There's no way we can just ignore such an insult to Samantha's father. As they were struggling to calm down, Thomas spoke to them with a smile. Well, whether this counts as an insult is open to interpretation. What? Dad, what are you talking about? If this isn't an insult, what is it? There are words that are offensive in one culture, but commonplace in another. Loser dad could be seen as a term of endearment, depending on how you hear it. After all, this Stephen here is a man who graduated from a mid-tier university, wandered around without a job, and somehow started a company through suspicious means. To those of us who rose through proper channels, educated with dignity and honor, he might seem like a loser dad who clawed his way up from the back alleys. So perhaps this name tag was a touch of humor and an amusing little act by someone with a sense for satire. That's nonsense. I agree. I don't accept that kind of twisted sense of humor. Humor is subjective. Whether you accept it or not is beside the point, and it remains a possibility. Either way, there's no need to take such a light-hearted gesture so seriously. Let's continue with the ceremony as planned. With that, Thomas gently placed a loser dad name tag back in front of my seat and said, "Go ahead, Stephen," flashing a cold smile. I immediately understood that if I resisted now, Thomas would brand me a petty man who couldn't even take a joke and insult me further. If an argument broke out here, it would ruin the reception beyond repair. So I clenched my teeth and sat down at the seat where Thomas had placed the tag. He grinned with satisfaction and said, "Stephen truly is a big man." With this, people may stop calling him a flash-in-the-pan starter president, and returned to his seat. Samantha and Tyler looked furious and were about to protest. But I told them, "Please, for my sake, let it go for now. Don't ruin this day." They both seemed to realize in that moment that Thomas had indeed tampered with the name tag data. Thomas's goal had likely been to publicly humiliate me and showcase my submission, to prove to everyone that I was beneath him and powerless to resist. Through this, Thomas likely intended to make it clear to everyone that I was in a position where I couldn't oppose him no matter what, like a subordinate, and to establish himself as being in absolute control. Throughout the rest of the reception, he was in high spirits, flaunting his authority as he mingled with guests. And so I endured the entire reception with loser dad placed in front of me. Despite the humiliation, I found solace in the fact that I hadn't ruined Samantha's special day. I imagined my wife in heaven smiling wryly and offering me some comfort for what I had endured. The moment the reception ended and the guests began to leave, so did the end of my patience. Thomas, having greeted most of the guests, was now lounging on a sofa in the hall, arms spread wide, basking in the afterglow. When he saw me approach, he simply said, "Oh," and crossed his legs arrogantly. Any decent person, upon seeing the bride's father approach, would stand and exchange kind words. But Thomas stayed seated, emphasizing the gap in status, as if a master addressing a servant. Clearly, He believed he had utterly subdued me today and intended to treat me this way from now on. That was a good reception. I appreciate that you understood the humor behind the name tag and kept quiet. If you continue to remember your place, we can have a smooth family relationship moving forward. Until the end of the reception, I had smiled no matter what he said, just to keep the peace. But now that my duty of presenting Samantha's marriage to the world was complete, I had fully switched modes. A smooth relationship with you going forward? You must be joking. I have no intention of being related to a man who went so far as to stamp an insult on my name tag. What? Are you drunk? Do you realize what you're saying? I'm fully aware, Thomas, respected executive of a major bank. I've treated you as my daughter's father-in-law and made every possible concession. Yet, you continue to belittle and humiliate me. I've had enough. From this point forward, I refuse any form of association with you. I see. So, this is a declaration of severance. Not just as family, but professionally, too. You clearly have no idea how much influence I have in the banking world. If I so much as make a call, no bank will ever loan to your company again. Is that so? Well, then you may want to know that I've already given instructions to withdraw all funds we manage from your bank. Huh? Are you trying to make me laugh? Even if your little company pulled its money, the impact would be negligible. Just then, Thomas's phone rang. Still chuckling, he answered, but after a few moments, his smile vanished. He began muttering, "What do you mean? And that can't be." After ending the call, he looked at me as if seeing something unimaginable. Emergency call from the bank, I assume. They must have told you that several $50 billion is about to be pulled and that you're urgently needed back for a countermeasure meeting, right? How did you know that? Don't tell me you're connected to the fund behind that withdrawal. I'm very much involved because I'm the one who created that fund. Years ago, the man who built a company through methods you never understood and always looked down on as suspicious, began working in financial systems as well. Once I developed a solid understanding of finance, I hired professionals and launched an investment fund division. It turned out to be far more profitable than expected. So I spun it off as a separate company. That fund has since grown into one of the world's leading investment firms and has been channeling a substantial amount of capital into your bank. I believe the total had reached around $50 billion. That's impossible. If you had access to that kind of money, why did you ask us for a loan? Because if I used that money directly, my employees would lose their edge. If all I cared about was making money, I'd have retired long ago. But I continue working to honor the memory of my wife and the years we built this company together, and to keep a record of the work I did to raise my daughter. And yes, helping my hardworking employees grow their skills and contribute to society is a key goal. Back to the point, I will no longer associate with you as family or in business. Not a single cent of my fund's capital will remain with your bank. Please return to your office and deal with the fallout as you see fit. But no matter what measures you take, my decision is final. Wait, there's no need to jump to conclusions. We're family now. We should support each other. Oh, so now you need the help of the loser dad. If you wish to call yourself an elite, then act like one and carry your pride through to the end. With that, I turned my back on Thomas and walked toward the exit. When he reached out, trying to cling to me from behind, I gently brushed him off. He collapsed to the floor, limp and defeated, and didn't follow me any further. News of my fund's massive withdrawal began spreading among investors that very night. Other funds and individual investors, reacting to the movement of such a large sum of money, began pulling their assets as well. The stock price of Thomas's bank plummeted. The bank convened an emergency meeting and requested that I return the funds, but I refused to entertain the request. Eventually, word reached the bank about what Thomas had done to me at the wedding reception. Once it was confirmed that his actions had triggered this crisis, the board of directors and shareholders were furious. Under intense criticism, Thomas was stripped of all his titles, denied his severance pay, and fired. The story spread throughout the financial industry. No firm would dare make the foolish move of hiring someone who had enraged a major investment fund. Thomas's return to the public stage was now all but impossible. Meanwhile, Tyler and Samantha were happily living their lives together, often inviting me over for meals. I'll never forgive my father for what he did to you at the wedding. He's unemployed now and stays at home, but I have no intention of reaching out. Unless he sincerely bows his head to you and apologizes, I won't see him again, and I won't let him see Samantha either. Tyler expresses anger and apologizes to me time and again for his father's actions. Just as he said, if someday Thomas were to come to me of his own accord with genuine remorse and apology, I might consider having at least a minimal relationship with him as family. Everything depends on what Thomas chooses to do. My fund has since moved its capital to another bank and resumed operations, continuing to generate significant profits. But I have no intention of living a life of ease with those profits. As long as my body allows, I'll continue working in my original field, programming, and apply my skills to contribute to society. I've entrusted the role of protecting my daughter to her husband, Tyler. From now on, I will quietly watch over them from a distance, offering support only when truly needed. And somehow, I feel my wife in heaven is watching over me, approving the path I've chosen. Is that your spouse? My body trembled with rage as Shane hissed at Kathy, "You two are flawed." "I'm all right." Kathy's voice seemed calm, but I could tell she was angry. "Let's just go home," she said. Shane gave a contemptuous sneer. A flawed individual behaving arrogantly, and turned to go. Nothing made sense to him. He was unaware that everything he said to us was a mistake that could never be fixed. I went to work as usual on the Monday following my disagreement with Shane. Shane attacked me as soon as he spotted me. "What brings you here? Why don't you and your spouse simply move into a nursing home?" "Will you please stop disparaging my parents?" My son Tony was the one who burst into our office. "What did you just say, Tony?" Shane's face went white. He must have been unable to talk since he was so shocked.
Yes, my son is Tony Redford, the executive director of this company.
I'm 64-year-old Robert Redford. I work at a company that processes food. I started working for this company 7 years ago at the age of 57. At that age, I never imagined changing occupations. I used to work for a reasonably large corporation that paid higher than most. However, I had to leave that company because of specific reasons. Kathy, my wife, suffered a spinal cord damage in an accident that left her paraplegic and confined to a wheelchair. I went to college with Kathy. Being in the same seminar led us to begin dating, and in our second year as working adults, we were married. Although I was aware that our marriage was somewhat early in comparison to others, I was adamant about marrying Kathy and wanted to move in with her right away. Our daughter was born 2 years after our marriage, and our son Tony was born 3 years later. I still regret leaving child rearing to Kathy because I worked for a job that needed frequent travel across the country. Since I was frequently traveling, we constructed our home close to Kathy's parents' house. I could never pay back Kathy's mother for all of her help with childcare and housework. Time went by. After getting married, Tony had Jake, our first grandson. Jake frequently came over to see Tony and his wife, who rented an apartment close to us. An incident happened when Jake was 2 years old and Tony's wife was ready to return from maternity leave. Tony's wife took Jake and Kathy to the hair salon that day. Kathy replied, "Why don't you take a break and relax?" She normally went to a salon with daycare. She volunteered to look after Jake. It wasn't the first time Kathy had looked after Jake, and he was very close to her. They were struck by a truck that ran a red light on their way back from the park. Jake escaped with only minor scratches after Kathy protected him, but Kathy suffered severe injuries and needed emergency surgery. The reality was tough, yet she barely made it. Due to a spinal cord injury, the doctor informed us that Kathy would require a wheelchair, be paralyzed from the waist down, and be unable to walk. I will never forget Kathy's words at that time. As she cried, she said, "I'm really glad it was me." Kathy had always been a kind person who never spoke ill of others. She was relieved that she could protect Jake and was glad it was her and not Jake's mother, who was paralyzed. For me, it was heartbreaking that Kathy would never walk again. I knew how much she loved exercising, how she jogged daily to prepare for marathons, and how it was her passion. But reality couldn't be changed. So I quit my previous job to take care of Kathy and join my current company. Since becoming paralyzed, Kathy has often fallen ill. She quickly gets a fever or becomes anemic when she's tired. The doctor says it's due to the stress of not being able to live as she used to and the lack of exercise, and there's nothing we can do. Because of this, I often have to take time off work and rely on others to cover my tasks. Yesterday, Kathy had a high fever when we woke up, so I had to take her to the hospital and take the day off. Of course, I feel guilty, but Kathy is my top priority. I apologize for taking the day off yesterday, I said as soon as I arrived at work. I went to apologize to the manager of my department, Shane Dawson. Shane glanced at me, annoyed, and clicked his tongue. You say your wife is weak, but I find that hard to believe. You take so many sudden days off every month. Try to think about our situation, too. I've explained to everyone, including Shane, that Kathy is paralyzed and I have to take time off for her care. I made it clear to Shane when I joined this department, but it seems he didn't take it seriously and has forgotten. It's not something I want to keep repeating, and the other employees understand, so I don't bring it up. Plus, you leave on the dot every day. It's like you're not taking your job seriously. The reason I leave on time every day is that Kathy is waiting for me at home. Despite being paralyzed, Kathy manages most of the housework. It's thanks to her efforts, but I honestly wish she would take it easy. So I try to spend as much time as possible at home by leaving work on time. Of course, I finish all my work before heading home. The company's policy encourages leaving on time without unnecessary overtime, but Shane doesn't share this view. To him, leaving on time is slacking off. Today, 2 employees are absent, so you'll take over their work. What? I frowned at Shane, who was smirking. Our department's tasks are mostly individual work. We are expected to complete the necessary clerical tasks every day, without fail and accurately. Each person handles the daily tasks without fail. Yesterday, 2 colleagues split my workload, so taking on the work of 2 absent employees is nearly impossible. Are there no other employees available? It's a bit much for one person to handle everything alone. Our department's tasks must be completed the same day. They're like daily closing tasks that can't be postponed to the next day. When you take days off, other employees cover for you. Are you saying you won't return the favor? That's just selfish. As long as you finish by midnight, the system has no issues, so you should be able to do it. Shane seemed determined to make me work overtime. He's been harsh since I joined the company 7 years ago. Shane is 7 years younger than me. He probably didn't like having an older subordinate. It annoys me that we have a useless old man close to retirement in our department. I can't understand why they hired someone like you. You'd be better suited for a part-time job collecting carts at a supermarket. Shane is always complaining to me like this. Sometimes it's annoying, but there's no other company as flexible as this one. I need the money for Kathy, so I have to endure it. I let out a small sigh. Let me get back to work, I said, and left the scene. I started working, wondering what time I'd be able to go home after finishing the work of 3 people. In the end, I didn't get home until after 10 p.m. I had informed Kathy that I would be late, but I realized I needed to have a serious talk with Shane to prevent this from happening again. When I got home, the living room lights were off. It was too early for Kathy to be asleep, and I felt a sudden sense of dread as sweat began to pour down my body. I hurriedly searched the house but couldn't find Kathy. My mind went blank as I called her cell phone. She couldn't be outside, but if something had happened to her... The thought made me tremble. I heard her phone ringing from inside the house and followed the sound to the open door leading to the balcony. There I found Kathy lying unconscious. She didn't respond when I called her name. I immediately called an ambulance, and Kathy was rushed to the hospital. As it turned out, her wheelchair had tipped over on the balcony, and she had lost consciousness without being able to get up. It seems she tried to water the plants on the balcony. I usually did that, but since I told her I'd be late, she decided to do it herself. It was midwinter and Kathy's life was in danger, lying unconscious on the balcony. I blamed myself harshly for taking on Shane's unreasonable work. To stay with Kathy, who was hospitalized for observation, I took the next day off work. When I returned to work, I would have to explain everything to Shane again and make it clear that I couldn't work overtime. Kathy was discharged on Saturday. The test showed no issues, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Please don't overdo it anymore. I've gone out on the balcony before. This time, I just happened to fall. Kathy seemed exasperated as I kept bringing up the incident, but the sight of her collapse had been so shocking that it felt like it took years off my life. While pushing her wheelchair near our home, I saw a familiar face approaching.
Hey, Robert, is that you?
I forced a smile and nodded to the last person I wanted to see. I was worried he might say something about me taking the day off. If that happened, Kathy might feel uncomfortable, and that was my only concern. You took another day off yesterday. How much more trouble are you going to cause the company?
I'm sorry, but I had a reason. I'll explain everything on Monday. I couldn't explain Kathy's situation to Shane here and now.
Honestly, I just wanted him to disappear from Kathy's sight as soon as possible. But my hopes were in vain as Shane smirked at Kathy in her wheelchair.
Is that your wife? Both of you are defective. What?
Kathy, who had been in a daze, seemed shocked by these words. I was also stunned by Shane's remark, which was much worse than I had anticipated.
I remember. Your wife can't move her lower body, right? How can you live with a woman like that?
Shane's words were utterly insensitive and showed no concern for Kathy. He didn't know how she ended up like this, and he shouldn't be saying such things. How can you say something so cruel? My wife was injured protecting our grandson and became paralyzed. I'm incredibly proud of her. That's just pity talk. Deep down, you hate taking care of a defective person, don't you? If my wife ended up like that, I'd divorce her without hesitation.
Seeing Shane look at Kathy with disdain made me tremble with rage.
Calling someone's wife defective is inhuman. Kathy seemed unable to process what was happening. I had never told her about the mistreatment I received from Shane at work.
Apologize to my wife. I don't care about myself, but I won't tolerate insults to her.
What difference does it make if you won't tolerate it? I don't know what connections got you hired, but you're a burden to this company. You take frequent days off, leave on time every day, and can only handle simple clerical tasks. There are plenty of people who can replace you. Shane's words were all true to some extent. I'm a burden to the company, but I didn't deserve to be told off by Shane like this. Don't bother coming in on Monday. I'll tell the president I fired a defective employee. You and your wife are a perfect match, both useless to society. I couldn't take it anymore. I felt the urge to punch him for the first time in my life.
Albert, don't.
Kathy, instantly understanding my thoughts, spoke quietly. Hearing her voice, I felt my anger cool down.
I'm fine. Let's just go home.
Kathy's voice seemed calm, but I could tell she was furious. Shane snorted dismissively.
A defective person acting all high and mighty.
And walked away. He didn't understand the irreversible mistake he had just made. The Monday after Shane's cruel words, I went to work as usual. Even though he had told me not to come, he didn't have the authority to fire me. Why did you bother coming in? You won't be able to work anywhere else, though. I'm heading to the president's office now. You might want to start packing your things. Shane must have thought I was a fool for showing up. He had the same condescending attitude as when I saw him on Saturday. I'm not officially fired. Besides, I expect an apology for the insults to my wife.
But...
Shane frowned at my suddenly confrontational attitude. He might have thought of me as just a punching bag who would take anything. I can handle any insult if it's just directed at me. But it's different when it comes to Kathy. You're getting cocky. An old fool near retirement daring to defy me?
Why don't you just move into a nursing home with your wife? Can you stop insulting my parents?
The one who suddenly entered our office was my son, Tony. Tony was glaring straight at Shane. He must have heard the entire conversation. The other employees, including Shane, stared at Tony in shock.
Tony, what did you just say? I heard you've been saying terrible things about my parents, and you think you can fire my dad? What gives you that authority?
Tony's tone was calm, but I could tell he was angrier than I'd ever seen him. Shane seemed to sense it too as his face turned pale. He must have been utterly shocked that the executive director of this company, Tony Redford, is my son. What's going on here? Why is the executive director's father in our department? No, but this guy joined the company as a mid-career hire, right? It must be a mistake. I'd like to ask, who could mistake their own father? We share the same last name, so it's impossible. But Shane was trying to laugh it off, avoiding reality. That's nonsense. Do you realize what you've done? Tony, having reached his limit, yelled at Shane. Tony wasn't the type to get angry, so when he did, it was quite intimidating. Shane immediately fell silent. I heard everything from my father. You've been treating him terribly, haven't you? I'm angry at myself for not noticing, even though we work in the same company. That being said, our company occupies an entire fairly large building. My department is on the second floor, while Tony and the president's offices are on the 14th floor. Moreover, we didn't openly acknowledge our parent-child relationship. Some employees might have noticed due to our shared last name, but we avoided talking to each other at work. So it's understandable that Tony didn't notice what was happening in my department. Treating him terribly? No way! I was just interacting with him normally. Do you think I wouldn't find out everything once I got involved? My mother told me every detail of what happened on Saturday. Plus, I've reviewed all the footage from the surveillance cameras in this department. What? I knew Kathy had called Tony. They were on the phone for quite a while, so I suspected she was discussing the incident with Shane. But I never thought he'd go as far as checking the surveillance footage. Every single insult you directed at my father has been recorded. This means our company can file a harassment claim against you. File a claim? Isn't that going a bit too far? This seemed to be an unexpected development for Shane. He probably thought he was just giving a little trouble to a mid-career hire like me. He never imagined it could lead to a lawsuit. I can't believe I didn't notice for so long. Dad didn't say anything because he didn't want me to worry. Of course, no father would want to tell his son he's being harassed at work and ask for help. I would have been happy to help you. Tony shook his head seriously as I said with a smile. It's because of us that Dad has to work at this company. Tony's expression darkened as he murmured while looking down. By us, he meant Tony, his wife, and their child, Jake. It's my fault that Mom became paralyzed because we left Jake with her. She got into that accident. If I had prioritized my family over work, Tony's strained voice was painful to hear. Kathy became paralyzed after Tony's wife left Jake with her to go to the hair salon. At that time, Tony was often recognized for his excellent performance at this company, leading to frequent business trips and accompanying the president on weekends. Later, Tony admitted that he got carried away by being considered for the next president. But it was understandable. This company is quite large with many employees. It's natural to be excited if your name comes up as a candidate for the next president. The problem was that Jake had just been born. Tony's wife was in a state of postpartum depression. With Tony coming home late every day and being away on weekends, it was inevitable that his wife would feel overwhelmed. Tony might have taken childcare lightly, knowing that we lived nearby. Seeing his wife struggle, Kathy offered to take care of Jake, which was understandable. If I hadn't been away for work, I could have taken care of Jake. Mom wouldn't have had that accident. No one blamed Tony for Kathy's accident and paralysis. Tony was working hard for his family, and the accident wasn't his fault. I even took away Dad's important job. I
Tony, you shouldn't blame yourself so much.
Kathy's accident happened 7 years ago, but Tony still couldn't get over it. So why did he end up working at our company? Wouldn't it have been better to stay at his old job? Shane looked puzzled, tilting his head. Tony narrowed his eyes, not liking that Shane was harassing me. Watch your mouth. My father is a developer who created many pharmaceutical products. He was the head of a famous National University's research lab and has received world-renowned awards. He's even met the President of the United States. What? Shane stared at me in shock. It must have been hard to believe that his mid-career subordinate was such a person. My father has always been exceptional. He graduated from prestigious overseas universities early. It was easier to learn from him than from school teachers, so our house was like a tutoring center on weekends, flocked in by my classmates. I was always proud of my father, who was respected by everyone. I was good at teaching thanks to my parents, both of whom were teachers. So I never attended tutoring centers growing up. Having parents who explained things better than my school teachers naturally made me good at studying. My father started working at the graduate research lab he attended and developed various medicines. He succeeded in developing medicines that were previously thought impossible, leading the pharmaceutical industry. But he was incredibly busy because of it. He often worked weekends and had frequent overseas trips, sometimes spending half the year abroad. But my mother always supported him wholeheartedly, believing that the medicines he created could save many lives in the future. I immersed myself in work. The busiest time was when the kids were in middle and high school, and I put a lot of burden on Kathy. Yet Kathy never complained and kept supporting me. But after my mother's accident and paralysis, my father couldn't continue working as he did. He had to leave the pharmaceutical industry. Though he was missed, there are still many people who need the medicines he creates. I offered to quit my job and take care of my mother, but both of my parents strongly opposed it. Of course, it was only natural that I would take care of Kathy as her husband. Even if the whole world needed my medicine, I had no doubt about quitting my job if Kathy needed me. We had some savings, but building a completely barrier-free house for Kathy had nearly depleted them. It wasn't feasible to live without working. But with Kathy's condition, it was also hard for me to work as a full-time employee. So I decided to sell off my assets. I traded in my beloved sports car for a compact car, sold my watches, jewelry, and anything else of value. Even then, the money would barely last us a year. So I had no choice but to sell my late father's prized antique watches. These were watches he had collected from all over the world, precious mementos filled with his memories. But Tony stopped me just in time from selling them. At that time, I wasn't the executive director yet, but I was highly regarded by the higher-ups. I used that position to plead with the president to hire you. The conditions were that you'd only do easily replaceable clerical work, could take sudden days off without getting fired, would always leave on time, but still receive a full salary. In hindsight, Tony's demands were quite unreasonable. The president was reluctant at first, but Tony's desperation and his indispensability to the company made him agree, reluctantly. Thanks to Tony, I can take care of Kathy while still receiving a proper salary. I'm truly grateful. Please don't say that. I did something unforgivable. Even though Tony still blamed himself, such favorable conditions were unheard of elsewhere. I was genuinely grateful. A few years after I joined the company, Tony was promoted to executive director. As a father, I couldn't be prouder. One of my main reasons for working hard here was so you could have a peaceful time in this department. Yet I had no idea this was happening behind my back. Tony glared at Shane, who had been listening in silence. Shane must have realized how dire the situation was. Harassing my father every day, forcing him to work overtime, and putting my mother in danger. Do you understand how I feel? I want to throw you off this building's roof right now. Tony's face showed he was dead serious, his anger boiling over. I'm sorry. If I'd known he was the executive director's father, I wouldn't have acted like that. I thought he was just a burden, doing simple clerical work. You're the only one who thought that, Shane, said a younger employee from the same department with a voice full of exasperation. Other employees nodded in agreement. Robert's tasks may have been simple clerical work, but his method was anything but ordinary. What do you mean? Shane frowned, puzzled. He was too fast at everything. In clerical work, it's hard to save time, but Robert's quick thinking allowed him to skip some steps, and he never made mistakes. Even we make mistakes a few times a month, but I've never seen Robert make a single one. When I first joined, this department was overwhelmed with work that didn't match its number of employees. Shane hadn't noticed, but a few younger employees were on the verge of collapsing from overwork. If there were 10 steps to a task, I started by verifying whether skipping steps 2, 3, and 4 would still yield the same result. I completed the evaluation of everyone's tasks within a month of joining. We all felt Shane was unnecessary, but Robert was absolutely essential. Frequent absences don't matter when you consider his usual work performance. Tony laughed at the young employee's passionate appeal. "You've earned quite the trust, Dad." Tony looked at me with a proud grin. "I'm happy they're so fond of me." "Of course, you're my dad." "Well, since the employees feel this way, I guess Shane is the one who isn't needed in this department." "What?" Shane was stunned by Tony's clear statement. "What do you mean I'm not needed?" "Exactly what it sounds like. You're fired as of today. I already have the president's approval. Plus, we're pursuing the legal action we discussed earlier. And it seems there have been an unusually high number of resignations in this department. We're contacting those former employees now. If we find out you harassed them, what do you think will happen?" As Shane's face turned increasingly pale, it became clear he was involved in the reasons those employees left. In a company with high salaries and good benefits, the only likely reason for leaving would be interpersonal issues. "There's no way you could stay in this company after what you've done to my parents." I told the president that if he didn't fire you, I would resign. He agreed to fire you immediately. Tony's way of saying, of course, perfectly embodied the term abuse of power. Even from my perspective, it's better without Shane, so I didn't object. "Don't think you can easily find another job. I have no intention of ever forgiving you." Yikes. Tony has always been unstoppable when he's angry. If he's saying this, Shane's future is undoubtedly bleak. "Hey, Robert, you're his dad. Do something. This is serious." "What can I do?" Shane, now completely terrified of Tony, clung to me as a last resort. Why he thought I'd help him in this situation, I'll never know. The one who doesn't belong in this department is you, Shane. I've always thought so. Without you, the work would flow much better. "What?" Shane's face twisted as I spoke with a smile. "I've interacted with many people, but you are by far the most foolish and spiteful. Usually, even the least intelligent people try to improve, and the spiteful ones have some redeeming qualities. But in 7 years of working together, I haven't found a single good trait in you. I'm usually good at finding people's strengths, so this is quite rare." Tony couldn't help but laugh out loud. Other employees chuckled as well. "Now, let's all get back to work. We've lost a lot of time. Until we get a new manager, I'll be in charge." "So just like usual?" The employees nodded and laughed. "Got it." As I looked around. "All right, I'll get back to work too. Dad, I'll bring Jake over to visit soon. Thanks for everything." Tony delivered a final, stern, "Get out of this company," to Shane before leaving the office. Shane stood there, too stunned to respond. After that, Shane was immediately fired and started applying to various companies, but was rejected at the application stage every time. Of course, Tony was pulling the strings behind the scenes. He sent an email to our business partners stating, "Do not hire Shane Dawson. Please inform your partners as well." Such an extreme move would typically be unacceptable, but Tony seemed to have significant power in this industry. Being the next president of our company and holding various other influential positions, he had strong connections with politicians and the police. Few companies would dare to oppose Tony. With Tony thoroughly ensuring Shane's exclusion, finding another job will be nearly impossible for him. Unable to secure reemployment, Shane's wife eventually left him. As Tony had mentioned, the former employees who left our department did so because of Shane's harassment. The company is covering all legal fees, and preparations for the lawsuit are underway. Shane will face a substantial compensation claim, an amount he won't be able to pay off in his lifetime. having lost his job and family. Shane now lives in a cheap apartment juggling multiple part-time jobs. Though he's barely making ends meet now, a hefty compensation claim is imminent. He won't be able to cover it with just part-time work, leading him to debt. But there's a limit to how much he can borrow with part-time income. He's likely to turn to loan sharks, leading his life toward utter ruin. As for me, today I returned home on time again and spent a peaceful evening with Kathy. Today, salmon was on sale, so I made grilled salmon. You love it, don't you, Kathy? After finishing work on time, I stopped by the local supermarket and cooked dinner. Back when I had my previous job, I couldn't even make a simple dish. But now, I can cook almost anything. Yes, I love grilled salmon, Kathy said with a happy smile. This is the happiest I've ever been. What did you say? Ever since you joined your current company, everything has been wonderful, and I'm truly happy. When she says, since I joined my current company, she means since she became paralyzed. Despite her restricted life, why does she feel happy? You were always so busy with work, never home. Raising the kids was fun, but it was so hectic I hardly remember it. Since I became paralyzed, you've been home every day, and we spend weekends together. That makes me so happy. Kathy smiled gently, but I was speechless with surprise. She never complained about my constant business trips, but she must have felt very lonely. She just couldn't say it. Kathy, I'm sorry. I was so focused on myself. You have nothing to apologize for. You're here with me now. The past 7 years have been tough, but I see it as a gift from God, being able to eat the meals you cook and do household chores together. I sometimes wonder if it's okay to be this happy. Everyone's idea of happiness is different. For Kathy, happiness was spending peaceful time with me. I felt very fulfilled these past 7 years too. Let's share this with Tony. Tony might cry. But I wanted to tell him that Kathy and I are truly happy now, so he can stop blaming himself.